Hello everybody, Adrian Plus here.
Yes, and Bridget. Hello.
And it's number 255 in Sounding the Jolly Old Shadows.
And in the middle of all the dooms and glooms and anxieties, there's been something really, really amazing, hasn't there? To me it has been anyway.
Well, yeah.
Well, the funeral of the Pope, the fact that having given his amazing Easter message, incredibly poorly, dies the next day, and then what could have just been a thing full of pomp and...
You didn't mean he delivered it incredibly poorly, did you? It sounded said having
I
delivered
say?
his message incredibly poorly.
No,
He meant incredibly
he was
poorly.
incredibly poorly
Right,
when
yes.
he delivered his message. Thank you very much, Mr. Platt.
It's all right.
But I think, well, I, like hundreds of other people, found the funeral surprisingly moving, actually. These things are so huge, aren't they, with so many thousands of people and all the dignitaries and royal people and heads of state and all the rest of it. But in the middle was a man determined to remain a man, an authentic human being.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it was the passion, really. I mean, there are plenty of things I'm sure people laugh about. People dressed in funny hats sitting in rows.
The ones that made it look
all
like
those
serviettes in a hotel. I've tried to make those mitres out of fabric to make them like...
You ought to write to the Roman Catholic Church, suggest you make
Well,
their
no,
mitres.
I think it's the other way round.
But anyway, no, it was vast and passionate. And because he, unlike some other church leaders, was always, as far as we know, we saw a very good film called The Two Popes, didn't we, about...
that was based on his reluctance to become Pope
and
his final acceptance of that role, wasn't it?
Refusing to do other than remain the man he was. So he was never saying, I'm wonderful. He was always saying, I have a job to do, and I'm going to do it as me. And he, as some people certainly disagreed strongly with one or two things he said, but
he continued to be authentic after his death. That was what I think was so extraordinary, wasn't it? I mean, like saying, normally the practice is that the mitre, the Pope's mitre, a new one is produced at enormous expense to go into the coffin. And apparently he said, well, that's rubbish. I'll just have the mitre I've always had in my coffin, and not to waste a lot of money on a new one. Yeah. He doesn't want to have anything on his coffin other than his name, just Francis, really.
I'm sure he would have said, or would say, I didn't deserve all that fuss. And that's what's so huge about it, that he remained little.
Well, he took the job, and I think there must have been times when, he would have loved to not have that job. But he took it and he made it his own in so many ways. And the number of young people that have been affected by him, and it's all the tiny things that were mentioned, things like when he became Pope, going back and making sure he paid for the bed and breakfast he had the night before, and lots of little things. And his last regret was that at Easter he would go and wash the feet of prisoners. He loved going into prisons.
And he wasn't able to do it. Yeah.
And he wasn't able to do things. And one of the things that he said was connected with that. Sorry, I've just lost it on my phone. Hold on. He said, even if the life of a person has been a disaster, even if it's destroyed by vices, drugs, or anything else, God is in this person's life. You must try to seek God in every human life. Although the life of a person is a land full of thorns and weeds, there's always a space in which good seed can grow. And I think that sums up how he saw people. He didn't see them... He didn't equate them with the things that had gone wrong in their lives. He saw them as God might see them.
Well, he had his own problems from the past, didn't he? Which he
He did.
he had to resolve. So yeah, no, I was very moved by it. I really was, and watching him as he did his final wave to the crowd.
Oh yes, day
I'm
before
sure
he
he
died,
was
yes.
thinking, I think I'm about ready to go now. Yeah.
Yes, I mean, there's some extraordinary things happening at the moment, aren't there? And I suppose the way that I felt about it was that it's been like it's been like a sort of solid rock of negativity and hardness in the news for goodness knows how long, and it was like a crack had appeared in that, and something that was pure light had shone through about youth, for example. And it is an interesting fact that apparently a YouGov survey has discovered that the number of young people between 18 and 34 has doubled in terms of the number who are taking faith seriously, whether they're going back to church. But certainly young Catholics, and the Pope had a very special message always to young people. Hold on to who you are.
Yeah.
Be brave. Go for what you believe. And I think there's been a huge increase in young people in the Catholic Church, not because of all the pomp or formality, but because they're seeking something.
All right. That's our dog barking at somebody a long way away, trying to protect us. Yeah, I'd be interested to know, you hear a statistic like that and trying to know what the actual reason for it is. I mean, some people are obviously talking about COVID and the way in which normal supports, personal, emotional, moral, spiritual props just broke and disappeared. And that perhaps people are saying it's got to be something more than this.
Yes, I think that's very interesting, really.
Hold you up.
Surely there's something more than this blanket of disturbing news and violent films and stuff that's coming through social media. Because in their hearts, a lot of young people have tremendous stirring, don't they, about something other that gets kind of a sort of horrible message that you grow out of it, that you put it aside and you get on with becoming independent and grown up. And yet there's so often something. I mean, what did he say? Space for seed to grow.
Yeah.
In all of us, maybe.
Yeah. Yes, I'd be interested to know what that is attributed to. I mean, I said just now something to support you, which is actually not something I believe about the Christian faith, that it supports you. I mean, you don't, on the whole, most people I know anyway, who are both sane and Christian, don't make up things about being safer or better. One of our frequently mentioned bits from the Bible is Peter on the beach with Jesus, and Jesus saying, "Do you love me?" He says, "Yes." "Do you love me?" "Yes." He gets very upset. "Do you love me?" "Yes." And what effectively Jesus is then saying to Peter after that is, you will never again be safe in this world if you really want to follow me, if you really want to be a representative who will say the things I would have said if I'd survived, I survived, which he wasn't going to, obviously. He'd already risen from the dead. But it isn't. A lot of people say religion is, or faith is just a prop. I don't think it is. I think it can be, but I think it needs to be full of humanity, like as demonstrated by the Pope, and it needs to be filled with a confidence that someone somewhere has a plan. That's what I think more and more now, and I want to be part of the plan, really.
And I think going back to the Pope, that was his message to young people. I mean, again and again, he said to them, you are the hope. You are the hope. You know, you can be part of the story. You're not just going to be somebody whose stuff is done to. You can be part of the story. I mean, one of the things he wrote was walk with him as with a friend, welcoming into life and let him share all the joys and hopes, the problems and struggles of this time in your lives. And he understood, I think, that there are loads of hopes and struggles. You know, this survey is talking about 18 to 34-year-olds. Well, 18 is the time when hopes rise and sometimes are dashed because you don't get into a college, or you lose your job, or you lose yourself, or you get in a muddle. And I think lots of young people get in a muddle. You know, they want things to be clear, but actually inside them can be quite a turmoil that they're trying to sort out. I can feel that in myself. I think you can feel it in yourself. I've seen it in our kids and in other young people we've worked with and know. And I think that somehow what the Pope did was say, I hear you. And one of his things to young people was learn to listen, learn to hear, learn to really try to understand what's going on.
Which is quite an art.
It's something you have to learn, isn't it? It's something you have to learn, to be in the moment with people, to not be rushing ahead to the next thing.
And to live with what is and not with what should be or what somebody else has said it is.
Yes, and I mean, we learn that again and again and again. You mentioned about Peter, he had to learn loads. You know, the moment when Jesus says, feed my sheep, is just the beginning of Peter's journey. And you think about Paul and Silas and what they had to accept when things were completely opposite to what they thought they were going to be.
You mean in Philippi?
Well, in Philippi, they arrived there, having been led there, to find there isn't a church.
Well, they've arrived also with Paul entrusted with the task of preaching to the Gentiles. So
yes.
what he obviously wants is some Gentiles to preach to.
Yeah, but there's no church.
There's no
All he can
church,
find is a few women, you know. I mean, that was great. I think that was great. I should have said great that he found a group of women who were believers, but it wasn't what he was expecting. And then what happens next?
Well, then they're walking along in the street, whether they're actually preaching or not, I don't know, but a woman follows them. It sounds like it's a youngish woman, shouting, apparently in support of them, but actually a sort of prophetess, I suppose, and she is very useful to some of the powerful people around. And they decide, when Paul turns to her and really tells her off, they decide this is a good reason to put him in prison.
Well, they would have found a reason, and that was a good one. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, it'll
do. Yeah.
So they put him in the darkest, deepest, most inaccessible prison cell. And when you think that at that point, people might have said, "Well, what's happened to the plan? What's happened to God's plan? Why is he sitting in the dark with shackles on his ankles with with Silas? It's all failed. What was the point?" And then, just to make things even brighter, there's an earthquake.
Yes, that's right. Yes, that did seem a little OTT, really, didn't it?
So now the shackles have fallen off.
Yes.
Because of the earthquake. Paul is sitting in the cell. This surely must be the moment when he leaves his cell, because God has freed him, and he'll go out and he'll get on with the job.
Yeah, and in the case of Peter, when it happened to him, it was like that, wasn't it? The prison doors blow open and an angel leads him out and into the street so he can go home.
But Paul stayed there, didn't he? He didn't go out.
No.
No, I mean, he sat exactly where he was, and the jailer, terrified because he knew that if he lost Paul, his life would be ended, probably be executed, is are so amazed that he's still there. He actually takes him home.
I know.
Him and Silas home, and they become Christians.
They become the beginning of the church in Philippi,
That's right.
don't they?
So
yeah.
it's so
Yeah.
easy
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
assume that the way things work from this spiritual perspective are the same as they work anywhere else. I mean, I remember when Terry Waite was a hostage negotiator in Lebanon in the 80s and late 80s. 1987 to 1991.
Well, that's when he was imprisoned.
Yeah, that's when he was in prison.
Yeah.
And everyone was in the church was praying he'd be released, and he was hoping he'd be released. I haven't read his book. I don't know precisely what he thought, but there's a really it's a reasonable assumption to say, if I've ended up here, however ridiculous this seems, let's just hold on a minute and see whether there's something about being here that is really, really valuable.
I absolutely. And I'm going back to the Pope, because I don't think he did want to be Pope. And having become Pope, having been chosen, I think exactly what you're saying. Right, I'm here. I'm the Pope. Now what am I going to do? What are the challenges day by day that I am going to face? How am I going to remain authentic? How am I going to, by listening, by concentrating on the small things, by making sure I don't let it go to my head, by making sure that other people matter? And it was so natural to him. Stay yourself. Be part of the story, part of the timeline, just as Paul and Silas were.
Yeah.
You know, and you know another thing I love. I mean, the jailer, he must have been terrified, but he didn't have to take him home. I mean, he took him home. He was so amazed by it all. He took him home so his wife and family could, and household, which would be more than just his wife and kids, would also see this extraordinary thing and be part of it. But he must have been a bit scared, because even then, because anything could have happened to him.
I think by then he probably trusted Paul.
Yes, but what I suppose I think is that there's always something we can do.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And of course, looking back to Jesus himself in the same context, by the time he had reached Gethsemane, by the time he'd realised the disciples weren't going to stay awake and actually weren't going to pray for him, they kept falling asleep, that he was the last hope of whatever it is that he was supposed to accomplish.
Yeah.
And he asked, as we know, if he could be let off, if it was possible for him not to do it, and to go into something that looks like the worst possible end. Who knows how sure he was about what the outcome of that was? We know that from there he shouted, "Why are you forsaking me?"
Yeah.
to God. So he went into that.
Yeah, but I mean, interestingly,
when he could have stopped it, and he didn't. He went on.
I mean, one of the things that Jesus said is count the cost. And I think that Jesus was aware of the cost. And I think, we talked about the Pope not wanting to be Pope. Being aware of the cost doesn't necessarily mean that you think, oh, it's too much for me. But it does mean that you go into something thinking, this is going to cost me. And I don't know that is really preached or taught or talked about much. When you decide to follow Jesus, it is going to cost you if you really want to do it properly.
Well, it may
Whatever
or
your
it may
role.
not, but
Well, it
the
will
idea
cost
is
you
you
because
give yourself to whatever is the consequence of that decision.
Yeah. Well, I don't mean it would necessarily mean you've always said that it might be anything from a gin and tonic in the bath to martyrdom. I mean, I don't mean that it's automatically going to be awful, but it might be, and you're open to ending up in a prison cell in the furthest point in the dark, not knowing that your shackles are going to be blown off by an earthquake.
I think the gap that exists between not wanting to do that and doing it is something that has cost an awful lot to the Christian church.
Yeah.
And that is the true power of love.
Yes.
Jesus had that incredible moment of affirmation when his father said, "This is my son, and I'm really pleased with him," and had always looked after him, had always given him a clear idea of where to go next and what to do. When John the Baptist was in prison, and we talked too much about this, and Jesus sent that wonderful message that made him realize he was on the right road. And they were cousins, of course. To be loved, like in the Herbert poem, is love trying to persuade this person to come in and taste his meat.
Yeah.
In other words, just before you get caught up in beating yourself up or saying, "I don't care what anyone does to me," just come and be with me and see why it's worth it.
Yeah, and I think that's what the Pope was saying to these young people. Let him in. Let love in. Let Jesus in. Let him into all the muddles and the difficulties.
But where do we lose that? Why do we lose that? I mean, we know that a certain kind of church has too many rules, but we also know that certain other kinds of churches have different kinds of rules, where you travel along a narrow path, which isn't the one that Jesus wanted people to travel. It's a narrow path of not allowing yourself to be more of a human being than you are.
No, I don't know what you mean.
Well, the ultimate.
Do you mean being more than you are?
No, not exactly. Well, perhaps being the best human you can be, but exploring all aspects of humanity. Yeah. Not that you move away from your belief or your spiritual instinct, but that you're not captured by it. Someone in the book I've just been reading said, the roots from a tree go down deep.
Yeah.
Exploring the ground. Yeah. Some of the things the roots find are good, but they go all over the place, and you need them also because they're the things that support the tree in the end. Shallow roots, based on making quick decisions that aren't supported by love, are likely to go wrong somewhere along the line.
And what is it that Paul says in Ephesians? Go deep into the soil of his love.
Yeah.
It depends what the soil is. If the soil is critical and judgmental and dismissive, then roots are not going to grow, are they? You're not going to become stronger. You're going to become frailer. You're going to feel, and then you're going to get wafted all over the place. My goodness, Adrian, we're getting into some metaphors here. But I'd love to hear, wouldn't you, what their response was to something that I think has taken a lot of people by surprise. I know somebody just today we were talking to said, she turned the funeral on thinking she'd just felt that she'd at least turned it on and listened to it a bit, and ended up being so caught up in something that seemed much more than just a ceremony and a lot of people with fancy costumes and different hats. And found something in the middle of it.
I think she was probably overwhelmed by the passion that was shown.
And the love.
Well, yes. Yeah, it was. Does seem to have been a real
Anyway,
love
we would really love to hear what your response was and where maybe some of the things, have a look at some of the things he said and see if they connect in any way with you or you disagree with them or whatever.
Yeah. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.